On this Saturday night, social bubble burst. Ontario cracks down on parties.
We can't have these wild parties right now.
The new province-wide limits on gatherings as the cases go up. The politicians testing positive for COVID-19.
It's unrealistic and unsafe to expect everybody to be sitting in the chamber.
Will this change the way we govern? Plus, mourning a Supreme Court justice.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a hero, an icon.
The Republican race to replace RBG before the election. And former Prime Minister John Turner dead at the age of 91.
Global National with Robin Gill.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. If we have learned anything from the first wave of the pandemic, it's that COVID-19 can be contained through aggressive measures. In Ontario, officials are so worried about the recent rise in cases, the government has extended restrictions on private gatherings to the entire province. Premier Doug Ford is essentially popping the balloon on big bashes. Indoor gatherings are now limited to 10 people. Outdoor gatherings are limited to 25 people. All gatherings still require physical distancing. The province is in the process of imposing new fines for people who throw large parties. The organizers face fines of at least $10,000, and guests can be fined $750 each. Today, Ontario recorded another 407 new cases. Quebec has the biggest spike with 427 new cases. Manitoba added 18. Saskatchewan reported 11. Atlantic Canada, BC, Alberta, and the Territories do not report on weekends. Two federal leaders, Erin and Yves-Francois Blanchet, have both tested positive for COVID-19. Neither will now be able to attend next week's throne speech. Their positive tests have some questioning whether there should be more changes to the way politicians do business during the pandemic. Couteur has our top story tonight.
This meeting with Quebec Premier François Legault was the last time Conservative leader Erin O'Toole was seen in public. The federal leader has since tested positive for COVID-19. And while Legault's results came back negative, he is self-isolating as a precaution. Now, Legault was in Ottawa Friday meeting with three other premiers who all say they're fine.
I wouldn't hesitate to get tested, but I'm feeling good. I'd rather the people that have the symptoms get tested. If that's one extra person getting tested and I'm not there, that's great.
Officials in the offices of Manitoba Premier Brian Pallister and Alberta Premier Jason Kenney say both are monitoring for symptoms, but they're not self-isolating because they follow distancing and masking guidelines in Ottawa, as seen in these photos posted on Twitter. Still, the fact that O'Toole and Bloc Québécois leader Yves-Francois Blanchet tested positive underscores the importance of doing politics differently in a pandemic.
You really have to do that with safety in mind, and that boils down to fewer people in the room, spreading out, wearing masks, and doing as much virtual as possible.
That sentiment echoed by Intergovernmental Affairs Minister Dominic LeBlanc.
We think it's unrealistic and unsafe to expect everybody to be sitting in the chamber, but we want to ensure that it can be safely and securely done remotely.
That's just one part of the fight against COVID-19. Testing is another, but lineups at testing centers continue to cause frustration.
The line hasn't moved for like 5-10 minutes, so I'm just going to go somewhere else instead.
Premier Ford addressed those concerns directly, calling on Health Canada to approve a simpler saliva test for COVID-19, even though one of his lead medical officers doesn't seem convinced.
You go in, you get the strips, you spit on the strip, and then you can see instantly, as it was described to me, it's almost like a pregnancy test.
They don't need a health professional to administer them, but you do lose a bit of sensitivity. So there's sort of pros and cons.
Antigen tests like the one Ford is referring to haven't proven as effective as nasal swabs. So for now, patience also remains a big part of fighting this pandemic. Couteur, Global News, Ottawa.
Parliament will resume on Wednesday with a throne speech focused on the COVID-19 pandemic. More than 6 months since the pandemic was declared, is the government prepared for a second wave? Mercedes Stevenson puts that question to Intergovernmental Affairs Minister Dominic LeBlanc for this week's edition of the West Block.
Just days away from the speech from the throne that will set the agenda for the Trudeau government going forward, Canadians are seeing a spike in COVID-19 cases and long lines for testing, creating anxiety about the possibility of a second wave, something that's already been declared in Ottawa. This week on the West Block, we'll talk to Intergovernmental Affairs Minister Dominic LeBlanc to ask him if the federal government has been sufficiently prepared for this second wave now that they have had months to prepare for it. Where are we at on the acquiring of personal protective equipment, rapid testing, and more money for the provinces to be able to run those testing facilities?
Provincial governments, which obviously have the responsibility to organize testing sites, to organize the delivery of healthcare, have been telling us that the additional resources that we allocated, a total of almost $19 billion, as I said, but 11 billion of it directly related to the healthcare needs for the restart of the economy and of the return to school. These are all things we've been discussing with provinces and territories. And frankly, we've met their ask in terms of additional funding.
There's a lot of questions about what will actually be in that throne speech. Justin Trudeau had said that it was going to be transformational, bold, major change. But with the rising number of COVID cases, it seems like the government may be shifting more to focusing on the pandemic than some of the big social program changes or environmental regulations they were looking at. I asked Dominic LeBlanc about what we can expect to see on Wednesday.
There won't be any surprises, Mercedes. We've been saying very clearly that the pandemic and the health and safety of Canadians is the priority. So people shouldn't be surprised that the government's focus will be squarely on that.
It seems as though appetite for a fall election is dampening on Parliament Hill, but the opposition will not give a guarantee that they support the throne speech. And Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has said that while he doesn't want an election, he believes that one could be conducted safely. Elections Canada should be reporting back soon on how to have an election during a pandemic. That said, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau called 2 by-elections in Ontario this week that will test both pandemic elections and the Liberals' support. We'll have more on this on the West Block tomorrow. From Calgary, I'm Mercedes Stevenson.
New data shows COVID-19 infections among Canadian healthcare workers was nearly double the global tally in July. According to the World Health Organization, healthcare workers made up 10% of world COVID-19 infections in that month. In Canada, nearly 20% of healthcare workers, just over 21,000, tested positive as of July 23rd. The hardest hit provinces were Quebec and Ontario, where 12 healthcare workers died from COVID-19. Tensions are reaching a boiling point in Nova Scotia over a lobster fishing dispute between Indigenous harvesters and commercial fishermen. The Assembly of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq Chiefs has declared a state of emergency effective immediately in response to what it calls political unrest and violence. It will establish an emergency command center to support families. It's also asking for help from the Department of Fisheries and RCMP. Yesterday, the Sipanicaty First Nation started its own self-regulated lobster fishery, but their lines were later cut. The lobster grounds where they're setting traps are currently out of season to commercial fishers who are outraged. The death of U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg has already become a political issue. The Republican-controlled Senate is determined to move ahead with whoever Donald Trump wants in that job before the November election. RBG was only one of 4 Liberals on the 9-seat bench, and if the Republicans get their vote through, the balance of power will be a huge shift towards the Conservatives. As Jennifer Johnson reports, the Democrats have a huge fight on their hands.
Americans are gathering outside the U.S. Supreme Court, mourning the death of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a champion of women, minorities, and gender equality rights.
I think that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a hero, an icon. I think she's such a great example for women.
It's like a gut punch, and I just had to come. Just being in the area, I just had to come here.
I, Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
In 1993, Ginsburg became only the second woman in U.S. history to take a seat on the Supreme Court. She consistently delivered progressive votes on the most divisive social issues of the day. Chief Justice John Roberts says they have lost a jurist of historic stature. Justice Stephen Breyer called her a rock of righteousness. Even U.S. President Donald Trump, never a friend of Ginsburg's, praised her lifelong accomplishments.
She led an amazing life. What else can you say? She was an amazing woman, whether you agreed or not.
Hours after Ginsburg's death, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said he will move forward with whomever President Trump nominates, a stark turnaround from his position 4 years ago, when he held up then-President Barack Obama's pick to replace Justice Antonin Scalia for 11 months, until Trump took office. Minorities, LGBTQ people, and women's reproductive rights activists are very concerned about the future under a potentially even more conservative Supreme Court.
We're screwed. 50 years of progress for women's rights is just going to be gone.
President Trump has tweeted his replacement for Ginsburg will happen in a timely manner.
We're just not there yet in terms of entertaining names. The president's obviously put forward 2 lists. The American people know exactly where the president stands.
Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden firing back.
Voters should pick the president, and the president should pick the justice for the Senate to consider.
Ginsburg's death will bring more bitter partisan fighting to an already divided Congress. Her legacy, championing against discrimination, will long be remembered, but her death may be a catalyst for a new chapter in American political history. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
The deadly poison ricin has been discovered in an envelope addressed to President Trump, and Canadian law enforcement is involved in the investigation. The suspicious package was intercepted before reaching the White House. It's believed the package originated from Canada. A female suspect has been identified. Ricin is a lethal toxin with no known antidote. Multiple packages containing ricin were addressed to former President Barack Obama during his time in office. In-person early voting began in 4 states for the 2020 presidential election. Long lines stretched for hours outside polling stations as voters arrived to cast ballots in Virginia, South Dakota, Wyoming, and Minnesota. Both Joe Biden and Donald Trump campaigned in that state, where Trump narrowly lost in 2016. Along America's west coast, there are more evacuation orders because the flames from those wildfires are moving even closer. In Southern California, thousands of people were forced from their homes and more are preparing to leave. The Bobcat fire is burning in the Los Angeles National Forest, about 80 kilometers from downtown LA, and it grew quickly overnight. Winds whipped up to 70 kilometers an hour, fanning the already towering flames. There's another positive development in Alexei Navalny's recovery. The Russian opposition leader who was poisoned is able to walk. Navalny posted his image of him walking down the stairs at the hospital in Germany that has been caring for him. He says he's regaining his physical and mental capacity. 5 days ago, he was taken off a ventilator and able to breathe on his own for the first time. Navalny became ill on a flight from Siberia to Moscow in August. His family believes the Kremlin ordered the poisoning, but the Russian government denies it. Coming up, a long career in politics, but a short stint as Canada's 17th Prime Minister. And how one event can turn into a COVID catastrophe. Global National is back in 2 minutes. John Turner has died at the age of 91. He was this country's 17th Prime Minister, serving for just 79 days in 1984. But his career in politics was long, serving in the cabinets of Lester B. Pearson and Pierre Trudeau. During Turner's time in Trudeau's government, he was finance minister, and he and his boss didn't always get along. Ross Lord takes a look back at John Turner's path to politics.
He was the golden boy of Canadian politics, a brilliant scholar, a superb athlete, fluently bilingual, and good-looking. When he entered politics in 1962, the future looked bright for John Turner. Lester Pearson made him a cabinet minister, and in 1968, just 6 years after entering politics, a young Turner ran for the Liberal leadership.
Messieurs les co-présidents.
But he came up short, defeated by an even more charismatic politician, Pierre Trudeau. Turner served as Justice and Finance Minister under Trudeau, but in 1975 he shocked Canadians by resigning. Amidst rumors he got tired of butting heads with Trudeau. Turner retreated to life as a corporate lawyer, but he did not abandon his political ambitions.
The two leaders.
In 1984, Pierre Trudeau quit and Turner assumed the role of prodigal son, returning to assume the leadership of the Liberal Party.
1,862.
At the convention, Turner beat Jean Chrétien, was sworn in as Prime Minister and almost immediately called an election.
Those facts are not correct.
That campaign saw Turner on the receiving end of one of the most definitive knockout punches of Canadian politics. Before resigning, Pierre Trudeau made 200 patronage appointments, and Turner had to defend them when he debated Conservative leader Brian Mulroney.
You had an option, sir. You could have said, I am not going to do it. This is wrong for Canada.
The Liberals were bulldozed in the '84 election, winning just 40 seats. But Turner held on, holding fast in the face of backroom grumbling and Liberal infighting. In the 1988 election, he thought he'd found the issue that would propel him back to power: free trade. Turner arguing powerfully it was a deal that would destroy Canada.
I happen to believe that you've sold us out.
Turner's stronger performance did win the Liberals more seats, but they still came a distant second to Brian Mulroney's Conservatives.
It's my intention to resign as leader of the Liberal Party of Canada.
Soon after, Turner resigned as Liberal leader, staying on as an MP until 1993. The Golden Boy, having tasted as much defeat as victory in his political career. Ross Lord, Global News.
Super spreading wedding. Still ahead, how COVID-19 reached past the guest list.
You're watching Global National.
Many jurisdictions around the world are imposing limits on the number of people who can come together at one time. That's to help prevent super spreader events. These are incidents where multiple cases of COVID-19 are traced back to an infected person in a crowded environment where physical distancing is limited. This happens at gatherings like weddings, funerals, and parties, or in venues like nightclubs and places of worship. That one person infects the people they come into contact with, and then those infected people spread it to others. It has become clear that so-called super spreader incidents have played a huge role in the transmission of the virus. Mike Drolet shows us how a single event can have widespread and deadly consequences.
The owners of the Big Moose Inn admit they messed up the head count. What began as a wedding reception of 65 quickly bloomed to 100, double Maine's indoor gathering limit of 50 people. From that one event where masks and distancing were ignored, Maine is now dealing with 176 new cases.
COVID-19 right now is not on the other side of the fence. It is in our yards.
What happened in Maine is what keeps health officials up at night: super spreader events that are hard to track. The epicenter of the Maine super spread is Millinocket, a tiny community untouched by COVID-19. Someone brought the virus to the wedding, and within days it spread to a jail, a nursing home, and a church where the wedding officiant is a pastor and noted anti-masker who has now blocked his social media. 7 people attached to that singular event have died so far, yet none attended the wedding.
The virus favors gatherings. It does not distinguish between happy events, like a wedding celebration, or sad farewells, like funerals.
Anywhere with a large number of people in little space is considered high risk. In Saskatoon, health officials say a party with 47 guests turned into 21 COVID cases. And the London, Ontario Health Unit released this contact tracing chart, which show how parties and meetups between 3 houses of Western University students led to 28 cases.
We know what we have to do, and I think it's each of our roles to not only be responsible for our own behavior, but to be a positive influence on others as well. There are some people who may think it's not going to happen to me, and that's the kind of attitude that leads to these events.
Super spread events are preventable, and when they do happen, they are difficult to contain. Maine is seeing it firsthand. Once they take root, it takes days, if not weeks, to contain. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
Stamp of success. Up next, why a BC doctor is being honored by Canada Post. Few people can say they have changed the world. One of them is BC Dr. Julio Montana. During the AIDS epidemic, he revolutionized the way HIV is treated globally. Now he's making his mark on a new Canada Post stamp. Linda Aylesworth explains.
How many people can say they're on a stamp? Dr. Julio Montaner can.
When I first got the call from Canada Post, it was like, whoa, what's going on here?
What's going on is that Montaner, one of the world's leading HIV/AIDS researchers, is being honored for a career that began in Vancouver in 1981 after he left his home in Argentina for a research fellowship at UBC.
With the expectation that I was going to go home and work with my dad in pulmonary medicine.
But he didn't go home.
Lo and behold, I met my wife, Dorothy. She was an X-ray technician at St. Paul's Hospital, where I still work, and the rest is history.
At the time, HIV had just started to rear its ugly head, so Montaner hadn't given it much thought.
But very quickly, HIV became a concern at St. Paul's Hospital. As you know, St. Paul's became the epicenter for HIV/AIDS in British Columbia.
Soon, Montaner found himself heading up a very modest AIDS research program.
It was myself, and as I often say, half a secretary. I used to share a secretary, and I had no budget.
But by the following decade, the program had grown, as had treatment options.
The biggest breakthrough that we have come up with in the last 6 to 12 months relates to our ability to suppress the viral replication.
The three-drug cocktail, triple therapy, was the highlight of the 1996 International AIDS Conference held in Vancouver.
Triple therapy turned what it was an imminent death sentence into a chronic, manageable disease.
Montaner continues to make new discoveries. As for the stamp, the search for his childhood collection has begun.
I'm looking forward to resuscitate it and just to include my own stamp to the collection.
Linda Aylesworth, Global News.
Well deserved. That is Global National for this Saturday. I'm Robin Gill. Tonight, Your Canada is Meeting Lake Regional Park in Saskatchewan. We'd love to see your corner of this country, so email your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you back here tomorrow. Have a great night.